Hello everybody, my name is Fortefyre and welcome to episode 11 of the Ready Go Gaming Show. Today, we're going to be talking about Mario. Now, for many of us, Mario was a household name growing up. Personally, one of my first Nintendo 64 games was Super Mario 64. Donkey Kong was a major part of my life, Luigi, all of those guys were Mario Party, Mario Kart, you name it. So I figured, hey, instead of just giving him a little bit of a nod in the Nintendo episode, which was way back in episode 4, I was like, screw it, let's go ahead and do an entire episode dedicated to solely Mario. Now, this is a Nintendo IP, so for all intents and purposes, please don't sue us, Nintendo. This is strictly for educational purposes only. This video will never be monetized, I promise. Anyway, because if I don't, Nintendo's gonna show up and be like, we would like to sue you. You know, that's what they do, right? Anyway, we're gonna be talking about Mario, and I'm not doing it alone. I've got some fantastic streamers who pretty much for the most part have fallen in love with everything that is Nintendo, starting with Breath of the Lyle, who is also a producer for the Ready Go Gaming Show. He's been on the team for quite some time. He's a retro/contemporary streamer, but lately he's been doing a lot more Dark Souls and stuff, which is totally fine. He's an awesome guy. He's also active duty military like myself. So yeah, really cool guy. Next up, we have Hamsh. He's a Swedish streamer who plays a lot of retro stuff. He's got a really cool project called Revenge of the Childhood. It's a bunch of games that he wanted to basically play in his childhood that maybe he couldn't get a chance to. And that's what he does. That's what his stream's all about. And it's a really good time all the time. Just a fantastic guy, fantastic speaker, and I'm glad to have him on this episode. Finally, we have Purse. Purse is a streamer who does really whatever he wants to do, but a lot of his stuff is centric to retro. For example, Resident Evil, Mario. I think I saw him play Earthbound once, and this is his second time in a row being here. He was on the Blizzard episode and he helped us, and that was really nice of him. But anyway, guys, that's enough out of me. Sit back, relax, and enjoy probably one of the longest episodes we've ever had of the Ready Go Gaming Show. But we have to. It has to be this long, because there's like 200 games in Mario's library, so we can't skimp it. You know, we want to cover it pretty in depth. But anyway, that's enough out of me. I'm gonna stop talking now. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the history of Mario.
Nintendo. This is a company we're all familiar with. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have traveled the rolling hills of Hyrule Field. We wouldn't have saved Corneria from the grasps of Andross. We wouldn't have rode in a high-octane race with Captain Falcon, and we would have never known that Samus was indeed a woman. Nintendo was where it was at, and where it continues to be. But I already helped cover the story of Nintendo in episode 4 of the Ready Go Gaming Show. Let's recap that. Nintendo started out making Hanafuda cards and ventured out to various business ventures such as taxis, love hotels, television channels, and even food companies. Eventually they settled in the video game industry by trying to replicate the Magnavox Odyssey in America, but they decided to put their own spin on it called the Nintendo Color TV game. From that point on, history speaks for itself. But the purpose of this episode is to talk about the lifeblood of Nintendo, the guy who started it all, Mario.
Mario alone accounts for $36 billion in sales, with over 500 million copies sold. There are 200 games that spawn different genres, and at one point, Mario even taught you typing. If your parents hated you, they probably bought you Hotel Mario for your fancy CDI. But the important thing to remember is that Mario started the healthy climb for Nintendo to become a staple in our childhoods and even our adult years. But where did it all begin? Nintendo had a penchant to try to make arcade games. Some of their early attempts at these games would include Sheriff, which sucked, and Radar Scope, which also sucked. Unfortunately, most of their games were clones of other games. For example, Space Demon, which was a Galaga clone, and Head on N, which was originally a Sega game of the same name. Or Block Fever, which was a clone of Breakout. And Space Fever, which you can kinda gather from the game what it's a clone of.
Space Invaders?
Wahoo! That's right, kids. Good job. Now I don't have to leave you in the cellar. Anyway, it was time for Nintendo to step up or step away when it came to arcade entries. But Miyamoto was inspired by Popeye, which had 3 critical characters: Popeye, Olive Oil, and Bluto. So we have a protagonist, his girl, and the antagonist. Well, this was the framework for what we know as Donkey Kong, Pauline, and Mario, right?
Well, it wasn't Mario, it was Jumpman. The game was simple. You play as Jumpman, who jumps over barrels, fireballs, and various objects to rescue Pauline from the evil clutches of Danky Kang, a big oversized Mankey.
Looks to me like you got it pretty angry.
Well, now what are we supposed to do?
Although Mankey is usually calm, it does have a bad temper. Once Mankey begins to thrash, stopping it is impossible.
What does it mean by thrash? Huh?
Yo, you're gonna die! Yo, you're gonna die! You're gonna die!
You should have let it finish that donut, Ash. Didn't your mother ever teach you manners?
Okay, maybe not a Mankey, but he's a pissed off monkey who apparently stays cranky because he grows up to be Cranky Kong. This was the beginning of what we now know as the Donkey Kong family of games. The namesake of Mario would be a permanent fixture with the release of Donkey Kong Jr. in 1982, where he plays as a genuine asshole, literally. Mario essentially kidnapped Donkey Kong, and it's up to Donkey Kong Jr. to rescue his father. This would be the only game in the 200 game library where Mario was the antagonist. Oh, when you win, Mario gets punted into the next century by Donkey Kong. Before we had Bowser kicks, we had donkey punches, or, punts, yeah. Anyway, the key takeaway would be that this game was the first game to feature Mario, but it wasn't the start of the Mario family of games. But let's talk about the character, who he is, what inspired him, and some other fun facts.
As we mentioned earlier, the failure of Nintendo's arcade games led to Miyamoto wanting to create a game within the Popeye lore, but he wouldn't get a chance to, at least not until 1982. Because of that, he created Jumpman. Now in Donkey Kong, the protagonist is known as Jumpman, but did you know that the brochure in English advertised Little Mario as a carpenter? Mario was supposed to be known as Mr. Video, who would be the overall mascot for Nintendo in all future games. But where did the name Mario come from? According to an article from 2010, Minoru Arawaka, who at the time was the president of Nintendo of America, had a chance encounter with Mario Segal, a really pissed off landlord who owned the warehouse Nintendo of America was operating out of, and he wanted his money. Arawaka put two and two together that Mr. Segal and his potential character Mario, or Mr. Video, shared many quirks, leading to the character being nicknamed Mario, and guess what? It stuck. Mario was designed to be a short Italian man who was set to help his friends and save the ones he loved. His large nose was created to emphasize Western influences, and his backstory was supposed to reflect the environment he was working in. For example, Jumpman was fighting Donkey Kong in a construction site, therefore Mario was a carpenter. With the release of Mario Bros. In 1983, the entirety of the level took place underground with pipes, and Mario was now a plumber. This game also would introduce Luigi, his brother, and thus begin the legacy of the Mario Brothers family of games. Donning his signature hat and overalls, Mario hopped and jumped in infamy, becoming the face of Nintendo, something Miyamoto personally said he never expected to happen. So far, we have Donkey Kong and we have Mario, each with their own line of games. For the purpose of this episode, we will be covering a vast majority of the games ever created in the Mario universe. But right now, we're going to skim over some popular games on every system that primarily focused on Mario, before integrating all the other games. Ready? Let's go. With Mario and Luigi crafting a massive success for the arcade spectrum and home console market, it was time for Nintendo to step up their game and create a true adventure versus an arcade game. This is what led to Super Mario Bros. In 1985. Over the course of the game, Mario must save Princess Toadstool from the evil clutches of King Koopa, also known as Bowser. The game was simple. You started as a smaller Mario and with the help of mushrooms could increase in size. The primary method of attack was to jump on top of enemies, but you could obtain power-ups that would boost Mario's power. In the first game, this included the Star Power, which made you invincible for a short period of time, as well as the Fire Flower, which allows Mario to shoot fireballs. This would be followed by Super Mario Bros. 2, depending on where you lived. For example, in Japan, there was a Super Mario Bros. 2 that looked drastically different from the one that we got in America. Japanese consumers were given a game that looked exactly like Super Mario Bros., but with an incredibly difficult challenge, whereas in America, consumers were given a rebrand of Doki Doki Panic. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but they would have the chance to play these levels with the release of Super Mario All-Stars, with the Lost levels being one of the playable titles on the cart.
In Super Mario Bros. 2, you could play as Peach, Toad, Luigi, or Mario. all of whom had their own perks. For example, Luigi could jump unrealistically high, Peach was able to float Mary Poppins style over gaps, and Toad was able to dig up items a lot quicker than any of the other characters. Mario was the most well-rounded, but it was up to you to choose who to play as. The final NES entry would be Super Mario Bros. 3. This one was a cult classic for the series with tons of items and a difficulty curve that was refreshing. Transitioning into the 90s, Nintendo began focusing on the Game Boy created by Gunpei Yokoi. The first title featuring Mario for the Game Boy would be called Super Mario Land. A year later, Nintendo would release the bombshell that was Super Mario World, introducing another critical staple of the Mario universe, Yoshi. This lovable green dinosaur that helps Mario and Luigi rescue Princess Peach yet again from the grasp of King Koopa. This game alone was considered one of the greatest games of all time, and soon after Wario would be introduced in Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins.
Bit by bit, and with game by game, the Mario franchise expanded to include names such as Pauline, Peach, Mario, Wario, Waluigi, Toad, Bowser, Donkey Kong, Yoshi. And with each of these pivotal characters, different games were spawned. Mario would tackle various genres, even bringing all of his friends and enemies to go ride go-karts, to play tennis, and he'd even take the time to teach you typing. And in his off time, he was a referee for Punch-Out! Characters would expand beyond Nintendo and be mentioned in other games, collaborating with Sonic at the London Olympics, and even duking it out with various HAL Laboratory characters, such as Kirby and Ness from Earthbound, as well as other Nintendo IPs, but that's a conversation for another episode. Mario had a massive influence in the gaming industry, and sometimes that influence bled over into other mediums. For example,
Say, neatness counts.
oh no, Luigi, don't tell him about the spaghetti!
A little piece of spaghetti.
Oh god, oh no, he's stealing. Oh god, he's mad!
Sauce on your shirt, as usual. Oh, really?
Welcome to the Super Mario Bros. Super Show.
Your socks
A
don't.
weird blend of live action, and for 1989, it was a novelty. It featured Lou Albano and Danny Wells, who played Mario and Luigi respectively. Basically, the story would start in a live action setting, and then it would transition to an animated show. It was pretty nifty, and had a sister show about The Legend of Zelda. But, we don't care about that one right now.
Hey, excuse me.
Then there was also a show about Super Mario Bros. 3 called The Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3, and even one concerning Super Mario World. Way in the future, there would be a live-action film that, we don't like talking about it. It featured Dennis Hopper as King Koopa, and it was infamous for telling us Mario's full name was Mario, and his brother's name was Luigi Mario. You know, the Mario Bros.
Without a doubt, Mario is one of the greatest icons in video gaming history. He served as a loyal mascot to Nintendo and was a major part of our childhoods in every single decade since his creation. From the NES to the Nintendo Switch, he's been there with his friends in tow. These games have grown up with us every single step of the way. The memories we've created those early mornings on the weekends with Super Mario 64, man, they take me back. Anyway, it's time to talk about the franchises, the paths, the mistakes, and the future of Mario as we know it. Let's begin.
Hey you! That's right, you! I know what you need. You need Plumber Boots 3000. With these you can go wherever you... Order now. The Super Mario Brothers we know and love today actually started out without them being so super. In fact, the game was simply known as Mario Brothers. We covered it earlier, but it's an anomaly, because it doesn't handle the same way the future games would. For example, most of the elements of a Mario game are there. You control Mario or Luigi, but the colors are off. You fight Koopas, but you don't kill them by jumping on top of them. Instead, you jump and hit the platform beneath them, knocking them over, and then you must run up and kick them. The infamous POW block was featured in this game as well, flipping over all the enemies on screen when hit. Awesome! And surprisingly, it wasn't exceptionally successful. The only mild success it had was in Japan exclusively. But then again, it came out during a dark era of gaming. known as the video game crash of 1983. Yeah, that can be bad for business. If you never had a chance to play this in the arcades, fear not, because this bad boy was on every system imaginable, even having an Atari 2600 and 5200 release, as well as being featured on a vast majority of gaming computers at the time. It was even available for the Game & Watch series of games, which was a portable and low-budget alternative to anything at the time. It's been ported, revised, remade, and refeatured countless of times through the years, even being made for the Virtual Boy under the moniker of Mario Clash in 1995. But unless you want to experience your eyes bleeding and potentially melt, I strongly suggest against that one. The most recent release of Mario Bros. Was when it was released as a part of the Nintendo Switch Online feature.
The next entry would be Super Mario Bros., the staple entry on the NES, and a game that is often considered to be one of the greatest games of all time. This entry was one that realistically started the Mario Mania that we all know today. The theme song alone is memorable from a mile away. This game from World 1-1 all the way to World 8-4 was a journey and a rite of passage for all retro gamers young and old. Too long, didn't read it, this game is the bee's knees. In Super Mario Bros., you play as Mario, or Luigi if you're playing a two-person game, which handles competitively, traveling through the Mushroom Kingdom to rescue the princess from Bowser. It was a simple game, but it served as the framework for a vast majority of games in the Mario universe, which was simple platforming that evolves over time. This game was obviously a staple on the Famicom and NES, but there were a few other versions. For example, Nintendo released a very special arcade cabinet known as the Versus Cabinet, where you could play against a friend in an arcade setting, and Super Mario Bros. Wasn't the only franchise to do this. Balloon Fight, Baseball, Castlevania, Top Gun, and even Blaster Master were all revised with the purpose of allowing people to play on this Versus system. Much like the previous game, it was remade and re-released various times, for example for the Super Mario All-Stars Kart on the SNES, but we'll get to that in a second. The one game we would like to point out would be Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, which was a revamp of the game that featured things that were implemented not only in Super Mario Bros., but also the sequel Super Mario Bros. 2.
Oh boy, Super Mario Bros. 2. Now this one has a wacky history, so let's just hop into it. After the immense success and global phenomenon that was Super Mario Bros., it was obvious that Nintendo should keep up the good work with this IP, and wouldn't you know it, they did exactly that. But they hit the gas pedal a little hard. By hard, we mean imagine Super Mario Bros. On the strongest steroids you can find on the blackest market known to mankind, aka this game was hard as balls. Super Mario Bros. 2 came out in a time where Nintendo was fiddling around with the concept of the Famicom disk system, an expansion to the Famicom that allowed for larger games to be programmed thanks to floppy disks. And Miyamoto made the decision to make this next entry centric to that expansion, but it was hard as balls, like we said before. The terrain was shredded, the jumps were pixel perfect, the game was... fuck, it was hard. It was so hard that Nintendo decided that American consumers weren't ready for this difficulty and looked at Doki Doki Panic, which was another game that Nintendo had released in 1987. In this game, you played as one of 4 characters. Imagine, who was the balance character, Mama, who could jump high, Lena, who could hover, and Papa, who was exceptionally strong and could pick up items rather quickly. Miyamoto knew that this game, given its mechanics and since the fact that it was created with the ideology that it was a Mario-based game, simply retrofitted Doki Doki Panic as Super Mario Bros. 2 in the United States. Imagi became Mario, Mama became Luigi, Lena became Peach, and Papa became Toad, with all the characteristics ultimately remaining the same. While this entry is considered a black sheep of the original trilogy, it is still fun, and without it, we would have never met time-cherished characters such as Birdo, Shy Guys, Bob-Ombs, and other enemies that would become a staple in the Mario universe. If you don't have a Famicom disk system, however, don't worry, because it was released as part of the Super Mario All-Stars Kart, which we are getting to in a second, I promise.
Then came Super Mario Bros. 3. Oh damn. The third best-selling NES game, and again, another contender for one of the greatest video games of all time. This game alone sold 17 million copies to this date and is one of the more advanced games for the NES library. Released in 1988, the same time frame Final Fantasy was coming into popularity, this game was phenomenal. There were tons of secrets, cool boss battles, amazing atmosphere. You could slide down slopes, you could fly. And by the way, the power-ups, don't even get me started. You could choose which levels you wanted to play. There were minigames galore, such as choosing a chest, lining up a picture, or even a game of memory, all of which yielded fantastic items such as the P-Wing, the Tanuki suit, or even the frog suit that helped you swim underwater. Did I drool for a second there? I'm sorry. Super Mario Bros. 3 was even featured in a movie called The Wizard, which served as a promotion for the game, and proved that games such as this could be played on a competitive scale, even if it is hypothetical in the movie. This is a must-play in the OG Mario series.
It's 1990 and the NES is coming to a close thanks to the 16-bit era of gaming, and it was time to jump to the next big system, the Super Nintendo. Miyamoto, as well as Takashi Tezuka, needed a title to prove what the SNES was capable of, and what better way to do it than release a Mario entry. It was time for Super Mario World. This game did more than spawn a TV show. It was the game for the Super Nintendo. If you wanted to be a cool kid, you had to have this game. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you didn't have this game, or if you currently collect for the SNES and do not have this game, it is utterly unforgivable. This is a must-play title for the SNES and was the highest-selling game on the Super Nintendo ever. Plus, Yoshi was in it. Despite it being a launch title for the SNES, it definitely stood the test of time in its own way, and was ported to various mediums, more importantly the Game Boy Advance version, which was called Super Mario World Super Mario Advance 2, and was even packed in with Super Mario All-Stars as Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World. We're getting to it. The tension is mounting. All in all, this title pushed the SNES to the forefront of the 16-bit era and was enough to grab Philip's attention for a title with the CDI, called Super Mario's Wacky Worlds. But thank God that didn't happen. Could you imagine?
But for those who played Super Mario World, Yoshi was more than just a character Mario could ride around and use as a sacrifice to reach new places. Yoshi was so impressive that he beat out Cloud in a poll as one of the coolest characters back in the day. Plus, Nintendo needed to promote their fancy pants new chip called the Super Effects chip, which they would use in another game called Star Fox. Enter Yoshi's Island, a prequel to the original Super Mario World, featuring Yoshi on a mission to reunite Baby Mario with his brother Luigi. This game is beautiful, and it featured handwritten art that you simply must see to understand. Plus, it was a refreshing boost to Yoshi since his few games were lacking to say the least. Yoshi's Island was another critically acclaimed entry that is oftentimes considered a masterpiece for the Super Nintendo, and put Yoshi as a major character from that point on. Going back to 1993, when Star Fox was released by Nintendo, Miyamoto began bouncing ideas for a 3D Mario game. But these games would need something more than just a standard formula for a Mario game, leading to potentially one of the most powerful games on the Super Nintendo called Super Mario FX, which according to Miyamoto would have been a miniature world, such as a world containing miniature trains. This title would have used the Super FX chip, developed as a result of a joint venture between Nintendo and Argonaut Software. A chip that was used in games such as Star Fox, Vortex, Doom, Winter Gold, and Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island. The idea was eventually canned, but reformulated to work for the Nintendo 64. However, it never came to fruition. Argonaut would go on to make a game featuring Yoshi, which would be a 3D platformer. But instead of a green dinosaur from the Mario universe, they would settle for a green crocodile, but you may know him as Croc. Returning to the game at hand, Mario would be in a different setting, a 3D setting, where interactions with objects needed to be fluid. They wanted Mario to be in a free-roaming environment, with better combat, a better camera than most attempts at 3D, and more importantly, they needed a voice.
Mario was a silent protagonist for a while, and it was time to bring in someone to represent the voice of Mario in a new setting, which you may think only happened before the release of the next game we're going to talk about. but it was actually for a game called Mario's Game Gallery, developed by Interplay, which had a few traditional games such as dominoes, backgammon, checkers, or even Go Fish. Auditions were held, and Charles Martinet was given the chance to audition. He almost didn't make it.
And I recognized the Sony camera bag with the guy behind him. And I said, "Hi, can I read for this?" And he goes, "Ugh. Okay, all right, come on in. You're an Italian plumber from Brooklyn. We'll set the camera up. You're a character in a video game named Mario for this company called Nintendo. And you're going to do a real-time animation thing. So we're going to start the camera. You make up a voice, make up a video game. Do anything you want."
According to interviews with him, he asked for permission to speak since he was at the end of the audition time frame, and said he was given a simple instruction that he was doing a speaking role for an Italian plumber from Brooklyn.
No, Italian plumber from Brooklyn. "Hey, get out of my face, I'm working here." And I thought, well, that doesn't sound like fun all day. And what if they're children? And I thought, well, I'll have more fun with it. I'll just, nice Italian guy.
Instead of approaching it as a plumber with a stereotypical Brooklyn voice, he opted for a soft, high-pitched, lighthearted approach.
"Hi together. You go get some sausage. I get some spaghetti. We put spaghetti and sausage in the pizza."
And was given the role the next week. All of the pieces were in place for the next entry, and in 1996, Super Mario 64 was released to critical acclaim. Featuring 15 stages and 120 stars to obtain this game screamed replayability. Also, it was developed and released in tandem with another critical Nintendo IP, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This game was fucking awesome. So much care to detail was implemented, and for 3D platformers in the 90s, there simply wasn't anything that could hold a candle to it. Most cameras were static, whereas this camera would essentially float around you, and you could command it behind you at any given time. Instead of levels, you had an effective overworld that freely floated into the 15 worlds that occurred almost instantly. It's no surprise that this game was the highest selling game for the N64 and the recipient of numerous awards.
The next major system, the Nintendo GameCube, wouldn't come out until 2001, 5 years after the release of Super Mario 64. So what did they do to the game in the meantime? Well, if you know anything about the Nintendo 64, there was a planned disc expansion called the Nintendo 64 DD, but it failed miserably. I've been looking for one of these myself, and they are fucking expensive as hell, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, they planned a prototype of the game for the DD, and it was decent, playing almost exactly the same as Super Mario 64, but outside of that, it was practically the same game. They did plan a Super Mario 64 2, as well as a weird game called Super Mario 128. There was a remake of the game called Mario 64 Shindo Pack Tiao, I don't speak karate language, I don't know this shit, which supported the Rumble Pack, but outside of the only major revision of the game was the DS remake. When it was time for the GameCube to come around, a Mario entry was guaranteed, as was The Legend of Zelda. After all, these two franchises alone were the major cash cows for Nintendo. The game would be called Super Mario Sunshine, and it would feature Mario, Toadsworth, as well as Princess Peach and a few of her servants taking a vacation to Isle Delfino when out of nowhere a douchebag Shadow Mario comes out of nowhere and starts vandalizing it with waterproof paint! The game was beautiful though. The music was memorable and the controls were simply fantastic. Pretty much everything that could have been done right was done right. It was the third best-selling game on the GameCube, losing out to Super Smash Bros. Melee and Mario Kart Double Dash.
It would be 6 years before Nintendo would release another console, and it seemed they were putting a lot of love towards their DS line of hardware. But they did something that for the most part was drastically different from the rest of the gaming industry. They incorporated the human element of gaming with the Wii. Where they lacked graphics, they made up with innovation in terms of hardware. The Wii was backwards compatible, had a Wiimote, as well as an attachment called a nunchuck, and for certain games, these controls were perfect. Look at Wii Sports, for example. You were practically in the game. The first Mario game released for the Wii would be Super Mario Galaxy, which was an attempt to bring the scale of Mario's world literally much, much larger on a galactic scale. Being set in outer space, Mario visits various galaxies to obtain the 121 Power Stars, which unlocks Luigi. It's definitely worth trying out. Now would be a good time to bring up the fact that while Mario was kicking ass on consoles, Nintendo was also developing a few handheld games that were legendary in their own right, starting in 1989 with the release of Super Mario Land, which was a launch title for the Game Boy. It had 12 levels and has Mario finding Princess Daisy? Who the hell? Oh Mario, you've got some splaining to do. Anyway, People loved this game, and it was massively successful. Some people thought of it as a portable Super Mario Bros., and given the size of the game, it was awesome! It would be followed up with Super Mario Land 2: 6 Golden Coins, which would be the first game to mention Wario, the greedy version of Mario. Whereas the previous game was more akin to Super Mario Bros., this game was more relative to Super Mario Bros. 3, as it had an overworld map and 32 crazy levels. The next game would be a Wario game, which we will cover when we get to the spin-offs, but the next game released would be New Super Mario Bros.
No, this game wasn't a remake of the original one, no matter what the title may imply. It actually has its own plot where Bowser Jr. comes up and kidnaps Peach, and okay, it's basically the original game, but not. So many of the mechanics were changed to the point where this is a heavy title on its own, becoming the best-selling game for the Nintendo DS, selling 30.8 million copies. Hopping back to the console spectrum, the next game on the main line would be New Super Mario Bros. Wii. See what we did there? This one was a unique game as it was the first major Mario game to feature cooperative play as well as competitive modes. Also, if you were struggling with a level, you could elect to use the Super Guide, which could allow you to watch the level being completed. In 2010, Super Mario Galaxy 2 was released to critical acclaim. It is one of the greatest games of all time and is one of the best-selling games on the Wii. The story was simple. Mario is invited by Peach to eat a cake. When star bits rain from the sky, Mario discovers a baby Luma who gives him the ability to spin. When Bowser comes in and dicks up everything, kidnaps the princess, and Mario is like,
"Oh shit, here we go again."
It's a traditional story, but that works for Mario. It's always worked. People love the game, and it's definitely worth being added to your library.
The new Super Mario Bros. Line was successful on the DS as well as on the Wii. And with the Wii U right around the corner, it was a perfect time to release the next major entry on the system, New Super Mario Bros. U. This time, Princess Peach is being held captive by... Take a wild guess, vote on your phones now. That's right, Bowser. This game was pretty cool, because it was based around the technological advances of the Wii U. By using the Wiimotes, or even the gamepad, you could control your playable characters perfectly, and according to critics, it captured the spark of the older Mario games perfectly as well. It was a perfect balance of the old with the new. And if you wanted to have a little more fun with your game, you could download Super Luigi U, which was an enhanced port of the game, running at an astonishing 1080p with 60 frames per second. Now, it may not sound impressive with the numbers, but the last game ran at 720p, so this game was definitely a boost. The next game would be Super Mario 3D World, which was a sequel to another handheld game. So let's jump back there for a second.
So after the new Super Mario Bros. Entry for the DS kicked ass, they moved on to Super Mario 3D Land, which was a return back to the 2D elements of Mario with 3D sprinkles on top. Imagine playing Super Mario 3 with super awesome graphics and the ability to use your items pretty much any time because the bottom screen was essentially your heads-up display. The top screen only had an action and timer. Power-ups from the previous games showed up, such as the Fire Flower and the Starman, and even the Super Leaf was present. It was a nice homage back to where it all began. The next handheld game would be New Super Mario Bros. 2, which was a 2D side-scroller that was vastly like its predecessors, but it wasn't nearly as successful, but it was still appreciated. The final handheld Super Mario game would be Super Mario Run, which was a running game for the mobile market. It was fun, but it got old quick. It was one of the only games created for a non-Nintendo platform. Jumping back to the console spectrum, Super Mario 3D World was the sequel to Super Mario 3D Land, and it handled practically the same way.
But what do you do if you aren't a massive fan of how Nintendo was creating the newer games? Maybe you wanted a chance to create your own difficult challenges using Mario assets? Well, you could, effective September of 2015, when Super Mario Maker was released. This game was the tits. Imagine this. You take Super Mario Bros., but you want to make it tough, you can. Then, just to make it even more fun, you can share your level with tons of people throughout the world. The possibilities were limitless. You could use assets from practically every single Mario game ever released, and for the most part, it was a blast to try out some of the levels people had made. There was a sequel just released called Mario Maker 2, and it was just as great, if not better. Some people complain about it, but... Oh, whoa. What's that? It's beautiful. It's... Oh my god. Super Mario Odyssey. Welcome to the greatest contemporary platformer ever created, Super Mario Odyssey. And yeah, we know this game came out before Mario Maker 2. 4 is just a sucker for dramatic entrances. This game is easily in my top 3. It incorporated elements from Sunshine and Mario 64, put it in a jar, heated it to the fucking sun temperature, then poured it out, and welcome to the fucking future. This game is easily a masterpiece on the Switch. Everything about this game is simply perfect. It was Game of the Year for a reason, and it was one of the best-selling Switch games, the only other major competitor being Breath of the Wild. The Joy-Cons allowed for seemingly endless opportunities to control Mario effectively. You could use his hat to capture or possess enemies, and that alone makes the game super interesting. Imagine taking control of a Bullet Bill after years of having to dodge him. Imagine taking control of a Goomba and seeing the world from his perspective. Imagine playing a game in a world where the graphics are perfect. This game is just freaking great.
And that's it for the main series of Mario, the Super Mario series, the main cash cow for Nintendo. But there were some spin-offs. Remember Super Mario Land? Of course you do. Their most recent handheld contribution was Wario Land Super Mario Land 3, which was a quirky game that featured Wario doing everything that Mario did, just a little bit differently. Then we had Super Princess Peach, where Peach is the one rescuing everybody else on the DS. It was a fan service for female gamers, but still did well, selling 1.50 million units. Then we had a super spin-off, which was for the Wii U called Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, which has a 2-player co-op mode and levels mostly based off Super Mario 3D World. Alright everyone, quiet on the set. It's time for the big reveal. Super Mario All-Stars! Hell yeah! This game was the best game on the Super Nintendo if you absolutely wanted to enjoy the earlier Mario games from the NES on a better console. All of the games on this cart had a facelift, meaning you could play Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, and even for the first time in America, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, which actually was the real Super Mario Bros. 2. What a plot twist! But it was watered down a little bit in difficulty. It's still incredibly difficult, but not Japan difficult, if you know what I'm saying. We already covered Super Mario Bros. DX, and we kind of touched on the Super Mario Advance, which is essentially a remake of Super Mario Bros. For the handheld consoles, which was decent. Super Mario Advance 2 was a remake of Super Mario World, which allowed for the link cable to be used for more people to enjoy the game with you. Advance 3 was Yoshi's Island, and Super Mario Advance 4 was Super Mario Bros. 3. So, if you want to play the Advance games, just know they are all remakes or facelifts, if you want to see it that way, of the older games. Plus, they are unfortunately out of order, so we suggest playing them on the true consoles or the virtual consoles. But definitely check out Super Mario 64 DS. It's almost a completely different game because you're playing with tons of awesome new characters. Plus, with the increased graphical ability of the DS, we saw a game essentially that was the product of what Nintendo would have done had they had the ability to do it as powerfully on the Nintendo 64. Don't miss this one out.
Then we had New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, which again was a more enhanced version of New Super Mario Bros. U, which as we mentioned had a remake called Super Luigi U. And that's it! That's the end of the Super Mario line that we know of currently. For many of us, Super Mario Bros. Was the go-to platformer, and it's really hard to hold a candle to it. Nintendo was spot on with keeping Mario afloat in this critical branch of the family, and we're glad. The big question is, What's next after Odyssey? I tell you what, I'm a little tuckered from Mario. Who wants to shake it up a little bit?
Hey, I got an idea.
What's that, Hamps?
Allow me to reach into my pocket.
Is that a banana in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?
Boys, I do have a banana in my pocket. And I'm happy to see you all.
Oh man. That is
Shield your eyes!
fucking huge.
Let's talk Donkey Kong.
Are you having a bad day? Have a banana, chew it, taste it, and have a good time. And then you become a banana. You live in the jungle and you go bananas. Oh. Bananas. It's all you ever wanted.
We're going to go in order of release for this series. Because if we didn't, we would be jumping back to handheld to console to arcade to handheld to console, and it would just be a big mess. So because of that, we're going to just hop into it DK style. Without the rapping, even though I'm a big fan of that one. Donkey Kong started as an arcade game, as did the sequel, Donkey Kong Jr. But we already covered those, so let's follow the lineage of DK from that point on. The next entry would be Donkey Kong 2, but you might not have heard of it because it was a Game & Watch game. Game & Watch was created by Gunpei Yokoi and was a cost-effective way of bringing home cool games that some people might not have been able to afford. Plus, many of these old Game & Watch games were the early inspirations for the Nintendo DS and SP. There were 2 more Donkey Kong related Game & Watch entries with Donkey Kong Circus as well as Donkey Kong Hockey. The next Donkey Kong entry would be in the arcades, but was also released for the Famicom and the NES, Donkey Kong 3. It was drastically different, and by drastically, I mean Mario wasn't even in the game. It involves Stanley the Exterminator jumping up and spraying Donkey Kong with bug spray, forcing him to the top of the screen, ultimately ending the level. Essentially the story is, Donkey Kong broke into Stanley's greenhouse and is being a legitimate douchebag. There was a pseudo sequel with Donkey Kong 3, The Great Counterattack for Japanese computers, but it was
Like edutainment games? Then you'll absolutely love the next game in the Donkey Kong series created for children who really want to learn math. Donkey Kong Jr. Math. It's a steaming pile of gorilla shit. Yeah, unfortunately this one was kinda not good at all. Imagine doing math to older Donkey Kong games, it's not fun. Before the next major title, there was a game called Donkey Kong Classics, which contained the first games on the NES, but that's just fan service at that point. The next major game after the last entry, which for all accounts was Donkey Kong 3, released in 1983, would be almost 11 years later. It would be a refreshing remake of Donkey Kong, commonly known as Donkey Kong 94. If you were like me, you played this and was wondering, what the fuck? This is a Game Boy game of the same game 11 years ago, and this is all we've accomplished? Then I beat the first 4 levels and then the fun began. The game was drastically different. It was filled with puzzles, collectible items for bonus lives, and tons of new enemies and music to boot. It was a simply fantastic game, and you 100% should play it, but bear in mind, you're playing as Mario, and he can't fall far, so be careful where you jump.
Donkey Kong was back on the forefront of being interesting to consumers, and 2 unlikely brothers named Tim and Chris Stamper decided to start messing around with 3D sprites for the Super Nintendo. By the way, these brothers founded a company named Rare, and they were itching to make games. Originally, their products weren't so great, but the chance encounter with some Nintendo staff impressed Nintendo, and Hiroshi Yamauchi decided to bring them along as a second-party developer. They wanted to use the Donkey Kong IP, and history was made. This game would be known as Donkey Kong Country, and it was a masterpiece on the Super Nintendo. As the 3rd best-selling game on the Super Nintendo and one of the greatest games of all time, it was highly linear, highly difficult, and incredibly fun. This was also the game that introduced Diddy Kong, Funky Kong, Candy Kong, and the old man himself, Cranky Kong. For those of you who don't know, the Donkey Kong that we know and love today is actually Donkey Kong Jr.'s son. Try wrap your banana around that one. Cranky Kong is the original Donkey Kong, and his son was Donkey Kong Jr. from, well, Diddy Kong is Donkey Kong's nephew. Candy Kong is the Kong Donkey wants to play banana games with. And Funky is a friend of Donkey. With King K. Rool at the antagonist helm, this game is an absolute classic on the Super Nintendo. Donkey Kong Country would be followed up by a handheld release called Donkey Kong Land. This game is essentially the same game as Donkey Kong Country, but with minor tweaks. Don't be confused, this game is definitely its own mini-series, a lot like Super Mario Land. In fact, this game takes place directly after Donkey Kong Country. Cranky is on his bullshit again and invited K. Rool to steal DK's bananas and spread them around, breaking the fourth wall, saying they would never match their success on the Game Boy like their previous game. And between you and me, that's one hell of a way to break the fourth wall.
Jumping back to the SNES, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest features Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong.
Yo, who the fuck is that?
I'm glad you asked. That's Diddy Kong's Boo Thing, and they are going throughout the island to rescue DK, who is kidnapped by K. Rool. This time, the story is set on Crocodile Isle with 8 wonderful worlds and 52 really fucking difficult levels. It was the 6th best-selling game on the SNES and was loved by fans of the Donkey Kong franchise. In the previous game, Donkey Kong and Diddy really didn't handle too differently, except for their size, which would slightly impact their jump. But in this game, Diddy can run faster and Dixie can spin her hair to float, which can help during some gnarly jumps, which the game has plenty of. Many of the barrel transformations returned as well, such as Rambi the Rhino, Unguard the Swordfish, and some others such as Squitter the Spider, Rattly the Rattlesnake, and Squawks the Parrot. Also, Wrinkly Kong makes an appearance as well. She's the wife of Cranky Kong. Other fantastic characters included Swanky Kong as well as Funky Kong. The Game Boy sister title, if you will, Donkey Kong Land 2, was essentially the same game and same story, but the levels were redesigned. The last Donkey Kong Country game would be number 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, which featured Dixie Kong and Kiddy Kong. Kiddy Kong is Dixie Kong's cousin. Much like the earlier 2 games, it had the same art style, but they pulled back the reins just a little bit and cut back some of the levels. It was a jumbled mess that just seemed to work to some capacity. Many details were changed, such as the level select, but even then it was still a playable entry that deserves your attention if you are a DKC enthusiast. The reason often attributed to this game not succeeding as well as the others is that it was released when the N64 came out, and that system was hyped. So many of the games on the Super Nintendo released during that time frame were overlooked.
Donkey Kong Land 3 was again the same. Oh, it's different? Yeah, this one is different. It had a different story, different approach, but similar levels. These games were day and night and would be the final entry as they always seemed to be paired with each other. There was a Game Boy Color update, but I wouldn't hold your breath to find it. It's called Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong, and Dixie Kong. And it was only released in Japan, unless, of course, you like using the Virtual Console, which definitely has this for the 3DS. I'm ready.
Go!
What? Yes! Huh? Wait, I want to play that game. What's this? Wild Cartoon Kingdom? What's so special about this? Well, the next game we're going to talk about was supposed to be called Wild Cartoon Kingdom, and it was supposed to be a real-time strategy game. Then Disney was supposed to have some influence with the game, naming it Pro-Am 64, which was supposed to be a follow-up, albeit non-related, to the NES game RC Pro-Am. But Rare was suffering to release one of their critical IPs, known as Banjo-Kazooie, so they wanted something powerful to keep consumers entertained while they waited to release Banjo. They did this by tapping into their already promising relationship with Nintendo, creating Diddy Kong Racing. This game was amazing! It was a racing game featuring Diddy Kong, Banjo, and a weirdly happy squirrel named Conker, but we'll talk about him some other time. This game was more than just a kart racing game. It was a hoverboat racing game, it was a plane racing game, it had mini-games, combat, and it had cutscenes, scenarios, it had time travels, and it had boss battles. It was simply the greatest racing game at the time, and it was super memorable. I rented this on a weekend during the summer when I was a child, and I regret not renting it again. This game was just wow. Plus, they brought back David Wise as a composer, and you cannot tell me that the music in this game wasn't memorable. Other characters would be Tip Tup the Turtle, Crunch the Kremling, Pipsy the Mouse, TT the Stopwatch, Bumper the Badger, Timber the Tiger, who was actually supposed to be the protagonist had Pro M64 been released. Despite this game being so powerful, it never really saw a sequel, and there were some planned, for example Donkey Kong Racing, which was scrapped. Then Saberman Stampede, which was also scrapped, but fear not, it was released in 2005 as Banjo Pilot, but it was highly Banjo-centric. Oh hey, this game got a DS remake, nice! But in this version, Banjo and Conker were pulled and replaced by Tiny and Dixie Kong, but it's looked down upon. Well, you know, at least they tried.
And then they did it. They took everything that was successful with Banjo-Kazooie, with Mario 64, with Ocarina of Time, and took a spin unlike any other. The game was so massive that it required you to get the expansion pack for the Nintendo 64. Nintendo promoted the hell out of this game, just in time for the holiday season, for all you good boys and girls. Welcome to Donkey Kong 64. Personally, it is my favorite game of all time. Alright, let's take it from the beginning. Okay, that's not the, it says in the script here that I'm supposed to say something bad about the DK rap song. I'm not gonna do that, sorry, Fortefyre. Fuck that script, okay? I'm gonna freestyle with a script here. Okay, here we go. Donkey Kong 64 is one of the most memorable games for the Nintendo 64 because there was so much to take in. The scenery, the music, the humor. There were multiple playable characters you could have fun with, all with their special abilities, upgrades, weapons, and even instruments. Like what? There was a bunch of mini games you could play, open worlds within an open world itself. There was item collecting, so much so that according to the 2008 edition of Guinness World Records Games book, Donkey Kong 64 has the world record for being the biggest collectathon of all time with a total of 3,821 items to collect if you want to get that 101% ending. Madness. Understandably, some people don't like collectathons, but for me, this was such an impactful game that defined my retro gaming experience. I bet you have one of those games too in your life. Donkey Kong 64 is worth experiencing for every Donkey Kong fan, regardless if you're swinging for completion or not. Alright, back to the script. The next Donkey Kong game would be a radical departure from what the series was known for. Usually when you thought of Donkey Kong, you would think of a platformer to some capacity. At least that's the direction that Rare had taken for a while. But this next game wasn't made by Rare at all. It was made by Namco. This time the topic was music, and the title was Donkey Konga. This game was pretty fun, and it had a special peripheral called the DK Bongos. Imagine Guitar Hero or any other music game, but with drums as the centerpiece. It was mildly successful, but it's a good time waster if you enjoy rhythm games.
The series would change it up again with the 2004 release of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, which was a puzzle platform game that brought us back to the roots of DK94, and boy does it feel a lot like it. In this game, you play as Mario, chasing DK through a toy factory trying to salvage the stolen mini Mario toys. It was okay. Then they brought back Donkey Konga with Donkey Konga 2 Hit Song Parade. What a silly name. It was basically the same game and they kept pushing the same idea, releasing Donkey Kong Jungle Beat that same year, in Japan at least. Imagine playing a DK game with bongos. It was weird and short, which can be a deal breaker for some people, especially in the GameCube era of gaming. Donkey Kong was kinda slipping out of the limelight, and they weren't making games that were up to par with the 90s entries. Those games kicked ass, and for the most part, the newer games they were pushing out were just meh. DK King of Swing would be the next game, and it's basically a copy clone of 1984's Clu Clu Land, where you swing around to get items. It's super simple, but you could play from a rather large cast, and hey, Bubbles from Clu Clu Land was even in the game. Then they continued the Mario vs. Donkey Kong line with March of the Minis. This game was unique because it brought back Pauline, who hadn't been in a DK game since DK94. The game was again not the greatest and only was decent to people who are absolutely in love with Donkey Kong. In fact, if you told me this was a Lemmings game, I would believe you. But other games followed the Lemmings path as well. Look at The Humans on the Sega Genesis. 5 more of these Lemmings-style games would be present, the most recent being an Amiibo title. Then came Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, which was... It's a racing game. It's a racing game that was made by someone that was unheard of in the gaming industry, Paon, who made a previous game we mentioned, King of Swing. And if you were curious, Paon was created by the Data East members after they shit the bed, so yeah. This game was competing with Super Smash, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Metroid, so this game really didn't get a chance to get off its feet, but it also sucks, so maybe it's just better that way. It's boring, the controls are tough to get used to, it's just a bad game.
Paon would get another chance with DK Jungle Climber, which felt a lot like your stereotypical Donkey Kong Country style of games in visuals only. The rest is still like King of Swing, and it did a better job when compared to that title, but it still wasn't great. Then came Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Minis March Again. Keeping that same Donkey Kong 64 feel, but it was a DSiWare game. But hey, level editing? That could be fun.
It had been a hot minute since the last major Donkey Kong game had been released, at least in such a capacity that would stand out among titles such as DK64 or even Donkey Kong Country. And in 2010, 11 years after the release of Donkey Kong 64, we were brought on a silver platter the majestic title known as Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii, 3DS, as well as the Wii U. This game is gorgeous. Imagine a perfect replica of the original DKC titles, but on a contemporary console with updated graphics and homages back to the original soundtracks. I'm personally not much of a Donkey Kong Country kind of broham, but this one looks amazing. It was developed by Retro Studios, which if you want a nifty full fucking circle moment, was created by Nintendo and Jeff Spangenberg, the guy who founded Iguana Entertainment, before they were acquired by Acclaim. Other than that, they made Metroid Prime. So this game was kind of destined to be amazing, and it was to some capacity, but then they included motion controls which kind of messed up the experience a little. The latest entry for Donkey Kong that was released would be Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, but again, it was just pleasing for people who thoroughly enjoyed DKC. Most consumers felt that it was a good time, but it was highly repetitive, and that can be exhausting for a platformer. There was another Donkey Kong game titled Mario vs. Donkey Kong Tipping Stars, but to me it's stupid, just like a vast majority of the other Mario vs. Donkey Kong games that have been out lately. Overall, Donkey Kong was a fantastic series that, much like Mario, jumped from the arcades to the consoles in such a way that ingrained itself in our childhoods, and that's a beautiful thing.
Whew.
That was exhausting.
Whew, yeah, that was a lot of information to take in.
So, what now?
I got this SNES, I got this new game called Mario Kart, and booze.
Oh! Mario Kart is one of the franchises considered the main lines of Mario games. The others being Mario Party as well as Mario vs. Donkey Kong. The first title, Super Mario Kart, was released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and was the 4th greatest selling game on the console. The big major technological advantage of the game was the inherent use of the Mode 7 abilities of the console, a sort of perspective-based graphical system that worked beautifully. In the game, you would race other Mario franchise characters using power-ups that you would obtain over the course of the race. This theme was essentially the same for all the games. It was followed up by Mario Kart 64 in 1996, this time being on the Nintendo 64, and introducing a few more game modes, to include the infamous Battle Mode. Originally it was going to be known as Super Mario Kart R, where R stood for rendered, but that was dropped. It was also the first time Kenta Nagata would compose for Nintendo, and the soundtrack for the game was even sold in stores. Wrap your head around that.
Then we jumped to the Game Boy for an interesting version of Mario Kart known as Super Circuit, which again carried the same themes, but introduced the concept of weight classes, because we finally, after all this time, decided to fat shame Bowser and Donkey Kong. This added some diversity to the game in terms of balance, but for the most part, didn't overly affect the gameplay. It was highly successful, selling 2.1 million copies by 2006. But Mario Kart was one of those franchises that really worked well on the consoles. And with the GameCube coming out soon, it was time to make the next great Mario Kart entry, Mario Kart Double Dash, in 2003. This one was unique because it introduced LAN play. That's right, 16 people able to play at the same time. The only issue was that it kind of lacked content because it was 7 years since the previous game had released. But hey, if you like it, you like it. The next entry would be another handheld one, but this one was good, Mario Kart DS. This one opened the floodgates for replayability by allowing players to not only unlock secret characters such as Drybones, Rob, Daisy, and Waluigi, but also by allowing people to unlock various karts. Additionally, this entry had missions that you could play. Too Long didn't read it. If you want to play a solid handheld Mario Kart game, then this one is the one that you should check out.
It's 2008 and the Wii is out, so why not bring another entry to the table? After all, the Wii was notorious for allowing random usage for the Wiimote. So why not, authorize the making of a plastic steering wheel that fits the Wiimote and allowed for you to basically pretend that you're playing it like you're driving, but you aren't because it's a fucking remote control. But hey, you're a child and we would like to play. And it's fun because it's Mario and we're all...
It's okay. It's just a piece of plastic. We can leave the steering wheel out, okay? Eat that shit.
You don't really need the steering wheel to play, but I guess it's a nice addition. Ultimately, the remaining games, 7 and 8, would be continuations of the exact same thing. But the cool thing is that they would often make nods back to earlier tracks, presented in unique and revamped ways. Also, 8 had this wacky anti-gravity aspect that really changed up the game, but hey, it works. All in all, Mario Kart has sold over 131 million units to date, and to be honest, it's a perfect time waster. And if you're curious, there are a few Mario Kart arcade cabinets out there to enjoy as well. I personally played one at Dave & Buster's, and it's kind of silly, but it is what it is. They're fun, but they aren't anything compared to the console games. Got too many damn consoles that hooking them up is a slight inconvenience? Got too many damn games that constantly stare at you, wishing for a chance to feel the soft touch of your little fingies? Tired of those goddamn cables having an orgy and you having to break it up before the golden moment? Introducing the LazyTron Infinite, the future of retro gaming as we know it. Look at the body. What's more retro than a fucking cardboard box? It'll play everything. Atari, NES, Famicom, Genesis, Xbox, in the case, mind you. It'll play Japanese import ramen noodles with optional patches, POW K-Cups. Hell, it'll even play a goddamn ham sandwich. Will it play Nintendo 64? No. No, it will not. Don't even ask. LazyTron Infinite coming to an overpriced e-commerce site near you.
Sticking to the topic of games you could play with your friends, this series was one you played if you intended on not keeping them. This franchise was dedicated to pissing off your friends, akin to how people play Monopoly and want to kill each other. The first game was released in 1998, but it wasn't made by Nintendo. It was made by a company called Hudson Soft. This single or co-op player game was a hit in the late 90s because it incorporated tons of minigames, and for the most part, the idea was brand new. While playing alone can sometimes be monotonous, there was at least a mission mode where you could play against the computer, but the true fun involved having 3 other players you could boss around and steal stars from. Also, interesting fact, if you played this game, you probably at some point burned a hole in your hand. Over the 90s, complaints were filed to the New York Attorney General's office and led to Nintendo of America sending out these gloves that protected your hand. No lie.
The next game would come out a year later, bringing back 6 playable characters: Mario, Luigi, Princess Peach, Yoshi, Wario, and Donkey Kong. In the first title, the story was simple, and according to the commercial, where they're all beating the ever-living fuck out of each other, and they wanted to prove who was the best. But in Mario Party 2, the storyline changed just a tad bit, to reflect Mario wanting his friends to create a new land after themselves. Then Bowser starts coming around, and being the shitlord that he is, messes everything up. Again, most of these games are the exact same thing with only small alterations with each title. The biggest changes included the removal of the spinning analog stick minigames, mostly due to hand injuries, and the inclusion of costumes relevant to each character depending on which map the player chose. Mario Party 3 would be the final N64 entry, and this time Waluigi and Daisy were playable, but only in party mode. And also, Game Guy spaces were included, which handled a lot like Bowser spaces in the previous games. But unfortunately, this game is recognized as the less popular of the 3 and 64 titles, and honestly, It's only great if you are loyal to the franchise, but many consumers felt that over the course of 3 games, some of the issues should have been addressed, and they simply weren't. Oh well. The next entry should be great, right? You'd think that after mixed sales of Mario Party 3 that Mario Party 4 would change something to keep players happy, right? Well, no. In fact, they mixed it up even more. In 2002's Mario Party 4, they removed Donkey Kong, a pivotal character of the Mario universe, and kept the same slow pace that the series was starting to become familiar with. And the minigames are even shorter than the previous games. While the graphics were better, consumers had finally had enough. The series was lacking, and they needed to change it up, or stop making them.
Unfortunately, for the most part, the remainder of the GameCube entries, Mario Party 5, 6, and 7, all failed to impress. It seemed that Nintendo was just pushing out these games to keep the series alive, and all of those games were seen as average entries at best. Even Mario Party 8 on the Wii was still seen as a subpar entry, and there was a production issue in the United Kingdom that didn't allow the game to function at all, leading to a massive recall. Thanks to a word included in the game that was a disparaging term for disabled individuals. Yikes. For the remainder of the console entries, the series would ultimately share the same fate. Mario Party 8 and 9 were still the same game, and unless you were loyal to the franchise, there wasn't anything outstanding about it. The final console entry would be the most recent Super Mario Party, which was actually pretty good, and one of the more redeeming factors would be that it was the first game in the series to feature online play, finally. Also, the roster for Super Mario Party was massive, including Mario, Luigi, Rosalina, Drybones, Boo, Koopa Troopa, Hammer Bro, Princess Peach, yeah you get it, there's a ton of characters there. And for the first time, Bowser Jr. and Diddy Kong were present. Well, on the main series console games, that is. Oh, that's right, there were handheld Mario Party games too. Let's talk about those. Mario Party Advance was the super shitty first release of Mario Party for the handheld spectrum, and it didn't fare well. Imagine a game where we were used to seeing fantastic graphics being dramatically downgraded to subpar graphics, lacking any changes during a turbulent time for the franchise that was struggling on GameCube. Yeah, no, this is not the handheld game of choice for many people when it comes to Mario Party. It's like Nintendo didn't even care to push a game that made any remote sense. Mario Party DS? Same fate. It only sold 8 million copies, which might seem like a lot, but this is Nintendo. Not Acclaim or Activision in the 2000s, this was Nintendo! Okay, let's put it into perspective. Ocarina of Time, in conjunction with the DS remake, sold 13.22 million copies. And the original on the NES? It sold 6.5 million units alone. This game just didn't make the cut.
Then we had Mario Party Island Tour, which released on the 3DS in 2013, and that was kind of fun, but not really. This was one series that was meant to stay on the console, and apparently Nintendo didn't get the picture because they released Mario Party Star Rush 3 years later, again to average views. By now, the board game fanatics were done, and as was the genre. The most recent handheld entry was Mario Party The Top 100, which was a comprehensive collection of 100 minigames from all of the Mario Party games, and it only featured one map. Yay. All in all, this series was one that had thrived in the early years, but quickly stagnated with zero attempt from Nintendo to bring new ideas and concepts to the table. Only slight changes, and consumers understand that, and tended to shy away. Hopefully Nintendo gets the picture that this franchise is just not working for people, and walk away gracefully. Remember earlier when we brought up that Mario was practically used and abused for any idea? Well, we're going to talk about that right now, starting with the edutainment games, of which ironically there were not many. The first was I Am a Teacher, Super Mario Sweater. What? Yeah, you make sweaters and you save the design on the Famicom disk system, and they would make the sweater for you. Wow! Oh man, what a time to be alive in 1988! The next few educational games were the obscure yet popular gems on the NES and SNES with Mario is Missing, where you solely played as Luigi, the first main role for him on his own until he got his own series with Luigi's Mansion in 2001. But this is 1993, and man is it dry. Essentially, you go through time periods trying to bring artifacts to the correct time period. The next one would essentially be the same with Mario's Time Machine, which again is practically the same game. Both were commercial failures. Then we had Mario's early years, titles that taught individuals grammar, math, and covered topics appropriate for preschoolers, mostly using the SNES mouse as the main peripheral, so if you didn't have it, you were kinda screwed. Fun fact, Fort had one of these games and no mouse, so he looked at it for 5 years before his father threw it away. Finally, we had Mario Teaches Typing, which was essentially a typing game that was monotonous as fuck. There was even a sequel, and yes, Mario is voiced in it, and it's dreadful. The final series would be Mario's Games Gallery, which we already covered previously. The kicker for this game is that it was the first game that Charles Martinet voiced Mario in, so definitely worth checking out if you're into PC or MS-DOS games from the mid-90s.
Then we had puzzle games, and man, these games were awesome. For many of us, these were the first puzzle games we ever got to play. Dr. Mario on the NES was perhaps the most memorable of any Mario puzzle games out there, and was massively successful on 5 different platforms in 1990. So it's only fair that Nintendo would want to expand, right? Well, they did, releasing a dual cart on the SNES called Tetris and Dr. Mario, which as you could assume contained both titles, with a unique facelift for the 16-bit era of gaming. It's even marked as the 27th greatest SNES game of all time by IGN, if you care what IGN thinks about games. Then Dr. Mario jumped to the N64 with Dr. Mario 64, featuring 6 different single-player modes with an extra 4 multiplayer modes, and it's simply amazing. There would be a WiiWare release for the sequel with Dr. Mario Online RX, which was simply a fucking fantastic addition to the franchise, but for the most part was reminiscent of the Brain Age 2 minigame called Virus Buster. However, if you're trying to play online, don't expect it to work anymore. The Nintendo Wi-Fi connection service is all but dead.
Continuing with the Ware style of release, Dr. Mario Express was a DSi Ware title that was essentially the same game, which, if you're interested, was designed by Arika, the same people who made the Street Fighter EX series. Then I guess at some point Mario gave some Percocet to DK to calm down his tits after all these years and lost his license because the next title was Dr. Luigi, and was to be expected. It was bullshit because the series was always known for the Mario aspect, and changing it up that much was unnecessary, and consumers recognized that. There were 2 more games, both of which were in the handheld spectrums, with Dr. Mario Miracle Cure, which included both Dr. Mario and Luigi, and was exceptionally subpar, and the death of all great franchises, Dr. Mario World, which was a phone game. Imagine that. Then we had Mario Picross, which is a puzzle game. I don't exactly know how this works, but I think it involves solving nonograms by fulfilling a columns number requirement, but I was never really good at it. Imagine Sudoku, but just more thought process. It released 2 games respectively in 1995. Ever played a little game called Wrecking Crew? It was released in 1985 for the NES and features Mario and Luigi who have to destroy objects with hammers to beat the level, but you can't jump, so good luck figuring it out. Also, an interesting fact is that this game supported the Famicom Data Recorder, a sort of primitive memory card that was a cassette tape, but it was useless outside of Japan, so there also was a not so well-known sequel called Wrecking Crew 98, but again, it was exclusively released in Japan.
Then we had Hotel Mario, which was supposed to be on the Nintendo PlayStation. What could have been? But that never happened, and instead we had it on the Philips CDI. Basically, all you had to do was close doors and avoid enemies, while trying to find Princess Toadstool in Club Koopa Resort. So wait a minute, the game doesn't even take place in a hotel called Hotel Mario? What the fuck? This all occurred during the time where Philips was given the okay to make games for Nintendo. But they totally cocked it all up with the Legend of Zelda CDI games, leading to Super Mario's Wacky World being cancelled before it even had a chance to be programmed. Well, I guess it's all for the best anyway. Finally, we had Tetris Attack, which did have Mario themes, but if you don't recognize it right away, you might recognize the name Puzzle League, which had 3 more titles, such as Pokemon Puzzle League, and they're all worth checking out. Did you know that there were several Mario-based RPGs? Well, most of us know about Super Mario RPG, which was released in 1996. which was a fantastic entry thanks to the collaboration with Square. Essentially, it was a Final Fantasy game with a Mario facelift, from the graphics to the music and the storyline, all being fantastic and highly reminiscent of other games. It operates on a turn-based system, and it was a simply great game that you definitely should check out if you're given the chance. There wasn't inherently a sequel, which is sad considering, but that wouldn't be the last time that we saw a Mario RPG series. Because Paper Mario was just around the corner in the year of 2000. This game had a unique art style that worked. Again, keeping the same combat system as before, but this time being created by Intelligent Systems. Oh, and if you didn't know, there was supposed to be a Super Mario RPG 2 for the Nintendo 64 DD, a disc-based add-on that failed miserably. Instead, we got Paper Mario, which was critically acclaimed and is considered to be one of the greatest Mario games of all time. It got a sequel called Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door for the GameCube, which featured a unique blend of 2D and 3D graphics. Here, Mario could interact differently with the environment. Plus, there were times where he would be cursed and would be able to transform his paper body into a boat or an airplane. The combat was just as successful as his predecessor, and again, this title was considered one of the greatest games of all time for the GameCube. This franchise was simply on fire.
Then we were exposed to Super Paper Mario in 2007, where Mario had to collect 8 pure hearts, again using the exchange between 2D and 3D as a major aspect of the game, which did stand out to say the least, but sometimes it did feel more like a platformer. But it wasn't without its internal flaws. The PAL copies of the game that came out early had a game-breaking bug involving it talking to a character without having a plot item, and yeah, it was a pretty big deal. Nintendo replaced all of the copies for free. In 2007, this game would be the 3rd best-selling game, and honestly, it's worth adding to your collection, much like all of these Paper Mario entries. Then, as is typical with Nintendo, during the high life of a franchise, they love to pack up their IPs and move them to handhelds, which is what they did with 2012's Paper Mario Sticker Star, which was a step backwards in comparison to the previous entries, but unless you like backtracking with subpar graphics, then this one isn't for you. Thankfully, Paper Mario returned back to the consoles with Paper Mario Color Splash in 2016 for the Wii U. Basically, Mario sees a red door and he wants to paint it black. No colors anymore, he wants them to turn black and blue and red and pretty much every color ever because he's repainting the world. Mostly because Bowser literally stole all the color from everyone. He's an equal color offender and Mario has to paint it all back with the help of Luigi and Peach, and guess what? It's better than Sticker Star, but only slightly. There's still some quirks about it that make it not worth playing, but there are some elements that definitely do make it worth playing. But it's hard to see the fine line between the two. All in all, this is the most contemporary release of the franchise, so let's let it go. Nothing can beat the original on SNES.
But one thing you should know is that Super Mario RPG and its associated Paper Mario games were not the only RPG series for Mario. There was a parallel series by the name of Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga that was born on the GBA that follows the Mario Bros trying to reclaim Princess Peach's voice. Because she had strep or something? Maybe it's because she's balls deep in Bowser or something, I don't know.
And this one statement is the reason why this content is not for kids. Take that, YouTube.
This game was developed by Alpha Dream, who for the most part was not well known at all. This series was their big break and ultimately was the only series they worked on once the original one came out. Outside of some Hamtaro games. Remember that show? Anyway, this game is the absolute tits, and we strongly suggest that you check it out, as well as the sequel that came out in 2005 called Mario & Luigi Partners in Time, where the game focused on co-op puzzle solving and made masterful usage of the DS's dual-screen setup. The combat was the same, and many of the RPG elements remained prevalent. This series being released as often as it was considerably good. It just hit all of the dots, whereas Paper Mario was being hit or miss. On the DS, the final release was Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, where you could play as Bowser for once, but it's hard to explain. You have to play it to really understand how this franchise used both screens. Sure, it's easy to see now, but once you play it, it's a unique experience. This title alone is considered to be the best out of all the ones we've mentioned, and the best from the remaining 2 titles, which were Mario & Luigi Dream Team and Mario & Luigi Paper Jam. Paper? That's right, the last game was a spin-off of a spin-off. Oh well.
Alright, it's time for a break. Let's do a little trivia to break up the monotony of what you're seeing. Let's see if you can answer these questions at home. What is the greatest Donkey Kong game of all time? 1. Donkey Kong 64, 2. Donkey Kong 64, 3. Donkey Kong 64, or 4. Donkey Kong 64.
Hamps!
Yeah, sorry, I got a little bit excited there. Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the little break from the information, but now it's time to hop back in. This time, let's focus on the brother of Mario, Luigi. Now, many people think that for the most part, Luigi's relevance in his own series of games took flight with Luigi's Mansion, but that wasn't the case. The first game he was solely in himself would be a Game & Watch game by the name of Luigi's Hammer Toss. But that was a LCD game, but it's still considered a Luigi game nonetheless. Then technically Mario is missing as a Luigi game as well, but we've already covered that. Outside of that, we wouldn't see a solo Luigi game until 2001 with the release of Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube. The storyline was simple. You play as Luigi, who won a mansion in a contest he didn't enter, and asks Mario to come with him to check it out. But then everything goes haywire and ghosts start popping out. After Luigi sharts himself in terror, Professor Elvin Gadd comes and lays the suck down with the Poltergust 3000 vacuum, and the rest you'll have to figure out yourself. Since it wasn't a launch title, it was destined to be a high seller, and boy was it. If you like handheld games, there was a remake of this for the 3DS. It isn't as great, but it's still fine. This would be followed up by a sequel called Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, way later. I'm talking 2013 later, 12 years to be exact. It was released on the 3DS, but it was also in the arcades. It played much like the previous game and was released to critical acclaim. This game was the tits, and it was on the 3DS, so that was astonishing, all things considered. Most of the time, 3DS games fail to reach the success of console entries, but man, this one was golden. So worth checking out. The most recent game, if we knock out the games we already talked about, Dr. Luigi, New Super Luigi U, would be Luigi's Mansion 3, which was just released this year on the Nintendo Switch, and so far people seem to enjoy it. Additionally, it has a single-player campaign as well as a pretty nifty multiplayer mode. All in all, Luigi's games aren't outstanding, but they are powerful and majorly impact the franchise as a whole.
Then we have Wario, who was up to tons of antics over the years as a pseudo-protagonist/antagonist, depending on what game he's in. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this greedy sack of shit, he's supposed to be an anti-Mario, much like
Luigi
is an anti-Luigi. In fact, Wario is the final boss of Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins. But since then, he has developed as a character to become a lovable anti-hero with his own cult following. The series he was featured in was actually the third entry in the Super Mario Land series, known as Wario Land Super Mario Land 3, released on the Game Boy in 1994. Essentially, after Mario kicks his ass out of the castle in the end of Mario Land 2, he desires his own castle and decides to try to steal tons of valuable objects to fund it. Through tons of levels, you collect various helmets to help Wario and find some treasure. It's a simple idea, but Nintendo ran with it, especially since they sold 5.19 million copies. And more often than not, it's considered the best platformer for the Game Boy. So what did they do next? Well, they made a Wario game on the Virtual Boy. Oh god, it was a mess! The main reason why it failed so badly was because of the system itself. The Virtual Boy had major design flaws from the beginning, a field of red and black that led to eye strain, ultimately killing the console. In the terms of the game itself, it isn't a bad game, it's just raspberry jam with black lines, you know? Thankfully, the next game returned to the Game Boy, with Wario Land 2 in 1998, this time bringing in even more puzzles and backtracking, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Since then, there were 5 more titles released, 3 on the handheld spectrum with Wario Land 3, Wario Land 4, and Wario, Master of Disguise, and 2 titles on the console spectrum, with Wario World for the GameCube, which is a 3D take on the series, and Wario Land Shake It on the Wii, which went back to 2D. Apart from the Wario Land series, there also was a series chock full of minigames called WarioWare, which started with WarioWare Inc. Mega Micro Games. This game had a dual release on the Game Boy Advance as well as on the GameCube, and as the game implied, it was nothing but minigames. And these minigames came at you at supersonic speed! Over the course of this sub-franchise, they released 7 different WarioWare games. All of them are hectic party games that I definitely think you should check out if you get the chance. Other than that, there were some one-offs here and there, such as Birds and Beans and Paper Airplane Chase, as well as Mario and Wario, a puzzle game released exclusively on the Super Famicom. Wario's Woods would be another puzzle game very similar to Puyo Puyo, which is a treat if you enjoy puzzle games. There was also a crossover on the Game Boy with Bomberman in 1994, but we got it as Bomberman GB in the West. So this was basically a fan service for fans of both franchises. Wario is awesome. And even though nowadays he's relegated to being in minigame-centric games, they are still just as wacky as you expect them to be, and incredibly fun. And that's what matters.
Then we have Yoshi, you know, the dinosaur companion of Mario that he usually uses to leap to higher areas before leaving him to die in an unknown fashion because Mario is a fuck? Yeah, he had his own series of games as well, and most of them were awful, except for the one that we already covered, Yoshi's Island. Well, Yoshi's Story in the Nintendo 64, but that one was kind of a jank fest. Originally, it was supposed to be a Nintendo 64 Double D game, which would have worked, maybe, but it was just too much for a side-scrolling platformer, and ultimately, I didn't like it. The original game that was centric on Yoshi was simply called Yoshi, and it was a shit show puzzle game that was fun for like 10 seconds before the monotony sets in, and if that's not enough, they made Yoshi's Cookie, which is practically the same except it was a tile matching game. Again, it was meh, you know. Then you add Yoshi's Safari, which was a light gun game much like Battle Clash, but thanks to the violence of another game released at the time, Mortal Kombat, this game was overlooked. Basically, you have 12 levels of super scope action, taking down bosses and clearing the enemy in the prescribed time frame. Finally, there were 4 Yoshi Island continuations that are limited to the handheld spectrum. And if there were any that you should play, check out Yoshi Touch and Go, or Yoshi's Island DS.
And finally, to wrap up this episode, we're going to talk about the sports games. It all started with Mario's Tennis.
Don't you mean Mario Tennis?
No, I mean Mario's Tennis. His tennis, nobody else's. Released on the Virtual Boy in 1995, which made your eyes bleed, but fuck yeah, tennis, right? It wasn't that good. But you know what was? The game Fort just mentioned, Mario Tennis, in 2000, which is a landmark title on the N64. This game was gorgeous. If you've ever played it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was just simply so fun. Plus, you could link it to the Game Boy Color version and unlock more courts. Mario Tennis and the associated games remained strong throughout the remainder of their life, with games such as Mario Power Tennis on the GameCube, as well as Mario Tennis Power Tour on the Game Boy Advance. But soon people were tired of the gimmick. That doesn't mean the games were bad, it just was an idea that slowly got less interesting after time. And that's going to happen for all the sports games we're about to talk about. Such as golf, which started with NES Open Tournament Golf, known as Mario Open Golf in Japan, of which was released on the Disk System. It's a novelty game, but the real well-known version we all knew and loved was Mario Golf, again released around the same time frame as Mario Tennis, with the same graphics and tons of unlockables. It was massively successful, and it just seemed N64 sports games featuring Mario were the tits, but often they didn't last. The next title, Mario Golf Toadstool Tour, wasn't that bad, but people dinged it because they felt it was the same game. I personally don't know how they expected Nintendo to change golf, but hey, to each their own. The last 2 titles, Mario Golf Advance Tour and Mario Golf World Tour, were both decent titles on the handheld spectrum, but again, they weren't nearly as successful as the N64 title. After golf and tennis were rammed up our assholes throughout the 2000s, they decided to branch out to more sports. For example, baseball, with Mario Superstar Baseball and Super Mario Sluggers. But they weren't great. How about soccer? Well, they did that too with Super Mario Strikers in 2005, which was chock full of Mario-style gimmicks that made it work for the GameCube. It even won Game of the Year in 2005, and the sequel, Mario Strikers Charged, was, well, pretty much the same. Then to tie it all in, Nintendo said fuck it, and tied all their remaining sports games in with games that aligned with the Olympic Games, and also with the help of Sega to make Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, which started in Beijing and worked its way up every year to tie in with every Olympic game to even include the upcoming 2020 Olympic Games. But don't hold your breath, it's Sega, and they've been kinda on their shit again lately. All in all, there were tons of sports games, and tons of games, period. Mario was a major aspect of our childhoods, and featured himself in some of the most memorable titles of our childhoods, from the NES all the way to the Switch. He's been there. And honestly, even as an adult, I still love the power of Mario, and the influence he has had on such a dynamic medium, the video game.
That was an amazing episode. For me, that was one of the biggest undertakings that we've ever had. It was the longest episode, we had a lot of stuff to cover, and it was really neat to go back and see some of the games I had never even heard of, like I'm a Teacher, Mario. Apparently, the intro has just now finished rendering, so if you hear that, that's what that is. I'm a professional! Anyway, guys, I just wanted to personally say thank you to Lyle, Purse, and Hamps for coming in clutch to help me create this episode. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. And as always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Ready Go Gaming Show out.